Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for part 7 of a 9-part series as we motor right along through What is Poetry by John Hall Wheelock. And again, this is for part 7, the 7th chapter in this relatively terse book, which in 126 pages appears to be trying not to answer the core and titular question. But this 7th part is called The Process and the Poem, and we have started most of these videos with the first paragraph of the chapter in a reading, but that is not necessary here because the first paragraph here is 2 pages long, and we'll jump to what is possibly the relevant part of this chapter, or this paragraph. Jesus. He starts by questioning poetry itself and with faux lament as to why the poet can't just damn well say what he or she means, complaining of the myth of the, quote, complicated and esoteric. And then Wheelock gives us this passage. Socrates himself must have succumbed to it, for he said, quote, the utmost that mere art can produce is as nothing compared to what can be produced in the state of mania, end quote. According to this theory, the poet finds the words for what he wants to say in moments of almost supernatural excitation and clairvoyance, known as inspiration, during which he states lines and stanzas or even the whole poem, which may take form in his mind with little or no conscious effort. Such things have, of course, happened. There is the famous example of Coleridge's Kubla Khan. But they are the exception rather than the rule, and for every good reason, as we shall see. Poets themselves have been largely responsible for the currency of this myth, not out of dishonesty, but out of the self-deception incident to the excitement of creation, the creation of a new thing, when, by a happy combination of skill, labor, and good fortune, this has been permitted to come to pass, partakes in the miraculous. It's a weird sentence structure. To the maker, in the triumph and elation of achieved realization, it does not seem that he could have accomplished it himself, unaided. From the very first, faced with an almost insuperable task, he had felt his own inadequacy. Has not the poet, from the beginning of time, called upon the muse to enable him to do the impossible? So that when, after a long torment of frustration, what had appeared impossible has been achieved, you cannot blame him if he persuades himself, as Blake did, that he has written, quote, from immediate dictation, without premeditation, and even against my will, end quote. It is with this that Wheelock pretty much contradicts almost everything that he has said, or seemed to have said to this point about the composition of poetry. Tell me if I'm wrong. If you were here, I'm assuming that you've been here for the first 6 parts of this series, in which Wheelock seemed to credit elation and inspiration almost exclusively with the ability to create poetry. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on there. Pardon me, I'm just not with it today. But we get on page 92 through 93 a pretty good little passage about composition, which reads as such. The feeling out of which a poem grows may be described as the awareness, on the part of the poet, of such a potentiality latent in a given combination. Speaking shortly before this of observing something in its individual parts as opposed to its whole. Giving the example of mistaking a blanket for a dog when you don't own a dog and wondering how the hell did this get here. Or seeing a tree and separating the leaves from the branches from the trunk and being able to describe or witness all of those things on their own which is something that comes to us in brief flashes in our adult lives because we see these things as units. We see a tree as a tree. We don't see the tree as just the leaves. We very rarely separate the leaves from the branches, etc., etc. But to start that quote again, the feeling out of which a poem grows may be described as the awareness on the part of the poet of such a potentiality latent in a given combination. At this point, he knows nothing more than that he is on the verge of some meaningful discovery. For the moment, he is seeing, as we say, that is, experiencing, familiar things in a strangely unfamiliar way. These images, patterns of meaning, complexes of experience, these images, patterns of meaning, complexes of experience, in whose presence, as it were, he stands, and in whose combination, if he can find the clue, he senses the possibility of a synthesis that shall be a new entity, namely, the poem, have suddenly become transfigured, are charged with some as yet indefinable significance. They have taken on a new character, a new urgency, a new insistence. And as I struggle to read Wheelock out loud tonight, I am suddenly aware of just how strange his sentence structure has become, but I would say that this passage is a pretty good estimation of how poetry normally comes to me. A strange and distanced type of observation, followed by some double entendre that might be contained therein, or some symbology which might be derived from the thing that's going on. And then you just sort of step back even further and you look without seeing. That is, you look inward as opposed to outward. I don't know if I have a better way to explain that. But moving on, Wheelock on 94 presents an image that I really like and have I have described writing many times in this way, so it is sort of comforting to me to see this come from someone else. The truth is, a poem must, like any wild thing, be stalked. It will never be taken alive by direct assault. Step by step and with assumed unconcern the poet approaches. Stealthily, through endless circles of trial and error, revision and elimination, he saunters around the prey. Line by line and sentence by sentence, its form and contours grow clearer. The net of language is flung, coil by coil, loop by loop. It is tightened until, at long last, coming up with his catch, the poet is able to examine and to understand what it is he has so long, so arduously, and so deviously been pursuing. The thing he may find there will often astound him. And I think that there are... So this passage is sort of at odds with the previous passage that I read on how poetry happens. I think that there are, for lack of a better way of explaining this, I'm going to use classical terms of masculine and feminine. Now, I don't mean these in a sexist way, but I have nary the language with which to put these in a better stated fashion. The feminine, classically, is represented as yielding. And I think that that first passage is sort of representative of the yielding nature with which a writer must assume writerhood. We have to have this soft spot in our mind for some new thing to land, for some new image, some new idea, some new thing. We have to have a soft spot in our mind for it to land. However, once it lands in that soft spot, we must pursue. We must chase and we must kill. And that is the sort of classical masculine energy, the penetrative energy. So I think that it is very telling that in between these two paragraphs, Wheelock has done none of the work to sort of explain why both of these energies are present in passages just a couple pages apart in his book, but are describing the very same thing. And I think it's because we don't understand it. It is difficult even to observe the fact that these two energies are happening and happening simultaneously. That soft and yielding absorbing nature of observance and the aggressive, hunter-like, violent way in which we must consume that new thing in order to put forth the energy from it. These are all very strange terms that I'm throwing out there, and I probably sound quite a bit like Elliot Hulse when I'm talking about them, but I don't mean to. I'll leave you in this video with our closing paragraph, which is pretty, very, very pretty. Men are divided by many things other than war. A great poem, despite the barriers of language, unites men as does any great work of art. A work of art represents a remission, a truce, in the midst of the endless struggle in which all are engaged. In its presence, the participants and opponents in that struggle come together no longer as such, but as disinterested spectators of the whole tragicomic drama and predicament of life. It is not so much that, at these times, we become united, as that our essential unity, lost sight of in the stress of the struggle, is then brought home to us anew. For a moment, we are seeing more clearly, having a larger vision from a vantage point above the arena of conflict. The mask falls from the face of the enemy and reveals a fellow creature, victim, like ourselves, of the tragic nature of things. This is a very pretty paragraph. Very pretty indeed. But I'll be goddamned if I can tell you what it means. And I implore you to tell me in the comment section below what that does mean. If you can give me some hint as to what Wheelock is actually saying there, I would greatly appreciate you. Because I don't know. I simply do not know. But that is it for part 7 of this read-along on the process and the poem. Be sure to join me here for part 8, which is some thoughts on poetry, which I am guessing, once again, defining poetry will elude Mr. Wheelock. But that is it for this episode. If you hit the like button, it really helps us out on the channel. If you would like to follow along this, and I think I'm going to start doing more read-alongs for nonfiction type books such as this, because I think that this was a very helpful discussion. So very helpful and fruitful for the content within. So hit the subscribe button if you are not already subscribed, and hit the bell notification if you would like notifications when videos such as this are to drop. And if you would like to help us create more content here on Strip Cover Lit, there is a link to our Patreon as always to be found in the description below.